Yes, we are live. Let's make sure we are live. How? Okay, we are live. Okay, let me get ready to share this real fast. Alrighty, and let's share with one more. The actual sister who asked me the question. So hold on one sec. Let me go to the sister. Here we go. Alrighty. All right, y'all. Shalom, shalom, shalom. Elvin Israel from the Assembly of Sound Doctrine Chandler, AOSD-Chandler on YouTube, RPK University on Clubhouse, King KINGDONEL on TikTok. I don't know if you guys can see it. King Donnell right there on TikTok. It was showing better right there. All right, King Donnell on TikTok. See here. AOSD-Chandler on YouTube. Oh, no, I didn't want that to happen. Hope it didn't mess nothing up. It did not. Garden Ministries on YouTube as well as Clubhouse. And is that all I have? RPK all day. Clubhouse, YouTube, TikTok. All righty. So the sister asked me a question. I did a response video to Brother Lewis. Me and him has been going back and forth a while. You guys, if you have been keeping up, you know this already. But I did a response video about the resurrection, and the sister, she listened to the video that I can, from what I can tell, and she said, great points and etc. So she had a few extra points dealing with the resurrection. If you guys don't know my stance, I'm a full preterist. I teach all biblical prophecies have been fulfilled. The only reason why people don't know all biblical prophecies have been fulfilled is because they haven't studied the history, the culture, the context, and the customs of ancient Israel. Therefore, if they're ignorant in the history or in the literature or how the ancient Israel viewed their prophecies, then by default, they're not going to know that the things that was prophesied to occur has actually occurred. So if they don't know it has occurred, they pushed it into the future. So what I did was I spoke on about the resurrection. Now, let me show you what Christ said the resurrection was first, and then we're going to dive into the response uh, for the sister. So, and I will always show the biblical verses, always show the biblical verses to show why I'm saying what I am saying. So, dealing with the resurrection, this is the conversation that was had. This is Matthew 22, starting at verse number 23. Matthew 22:23. Now, if I should, let me see if I can maybe pull up the Sadducees' belief in Josephus as well, because You have to understand what the Sadducees actually believed in order to understand what happened in Matthew 22. So if I can find it real fast, I wasn't prepared for this per se. So if I can't find it within the 30 seconds, I would just say what the Sadducees believe. But you guys, if you know me, I like to show so you guys can't say that I'm making anything up. Okay, we are here. I have found it. So let me get it real fast on the screen. So, y'all know who Josephus is? First century Jew. He had dealings with the Pharisees. He had dealings with the Essenes. He was a historian. He was a priest, and etc. An actual Jew from the first century, contemporary to the Messiah, the disciples, and etc. So let's get his work pulled up so you guys can actually see what he stated the Sadducees believed. All right, so we're going to go to the Antiquity of the Jews. Antiquity of the Jews, 13, book 13, chapter 5, section 9. 13, 5, 9. Let's see if we can pull that up real fast. Book 13. Let me get my screen changed over so you guys can see exactly what I have going on. Once again, everything I say, I like to show. Just don't take my word for it. I'm going to actually show it. I'm going to present it for you to be able to see. See, a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people use that take my word for it strategy. They have that just because I said it is true strategy and teaching style. I don't do that. I'm going to show you it. So this is Antiquity of the Jews. We all can see this. Let me make sure that we're looking good on live. So let's see. Yep. Antiquity of the Jews. You see it right there? Josephus, Antiquity of the Jews, book 13. So we're going to go to book 13, chapter 5. So we're at chapter 5, book 13, and we're going to go to section 9. See right here, we are at section 9. This is what Josephus stated. At this time, there were 3 sects among the Jews who had different opinions concerning human actions. The one sect was called the sect of the Pharisees, another the sect of the Sadducees, and the other the sect of the Essenes. So we're going to go to the Sadducees. And for the Sadducees, they take away fate and say that there is no such thing and that the events of human affairs are not at its disposal, but they suppose that all our actions are in our own power, so that we are ourselves the cause of what is good and receive what is evil from our own folly. So that's one thing they said. Mankind was pretty much in control of their destiny, of their fate. Don't blame the Lord if something bad happens. You brought it upon yourself. All right. So that's one of their beliefs. Let me show you another of their beliefs. We're going to go to Josephus spoke about them again in Antiquity of the Jews, book 18, chapter 1, section, let me see here, section 1. So let me show you what he said about them right here. So we are in book 18 now. Book 18, chapter 1, section 1. So you see it right there. And we're just going to go down to where he's talking about the Sadducees. In fact, sorry about that, y'all. It's right here, section 2. Section 2. Sorry about that. The Jews had for a great while had three sects of philosophy peculiar to themselves. So the Jews had three ways, three methods of understanding life and etc. peculiar, strange to themselves, belonging to their group. The sect of the Essenes and the sect of the Sadducees, and the third sort of opinions was that of there was no so-called Pharisees and etc. So we're going to go to the Sadducees. So now we are in section 4. You see it right there, section 4, and he says, "But the doctrine of the Sadducees is this: that souls die with the bodies, nor do they regard the observation of anything besides what the law enjoins them." So they only deal with the law of Moses, and they believe that the souls die with the body. Okay. For they think it is an instance of virtue to dispute with those teachers of philosophy who they frequent. But this doctrine is received but by a few, yet by those still of great dignity. But they are able to do almost nothing of themselves. For when they become magistrates, as they are unwilling and by force sometimes obliged to be, they addict themselves to the notions of the Pharisees, because the multitude would not otherwise bear them. So when they become in power, like magistrates and etc., they have to turn their doctrine to that of the Pharisees, because a multitude of people believe the Pharisees over the Sadducees' philosophy. But here we see that the Sadducees' philosophy was that the souls die with the bodies, and they don't do anything besides what the law enjoins them. So they only deal with the law of Moses, and they believe that the souls die with the body. Okay, so they only deal with the first 5 books, and within those first 5 books, they believe that since there's nothing about the soul living on in those 5 books from what they saw, they believe that the souls died with the body. Okay, so this is what we have for the understanding of the Sadducees. So now we're going to go back to Matthew 22, because we understand the doctrine of the Sadducees now. So Matthew 22, starting at verse 23. The same day Sadducees came to him, who say, there is no resurrection. See? So they already don't believe that there is a resurrection. And they asked him a question, saying, Teacher, Moses said, if a man dies having no children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. So this is dealing with the elaborate a marriage agreement, that in order for the brother name to continue on and his inheritance to continue on, if he's married and he dies childless, his wife is obliged, she's obligated to marry his brother to bring up a child for his brother, rear up a child for his brother, so the inheritance and the name of his brother continue. That's how they did with the continuation of Israel. Okay, so we got the backstory. This is what it says in verse 25. Now there were 7 brothers among us. The first married and died, and having no offspring, left his wife to his brother. So the first thing we should realize, how Jews love the number 7. So they started with, there was 7 brothers. You see, they love the number 7. Having no offspring, left his wife to his brother. So to the second and the third, down to the 7th, after them all, the woman died. in the resurrection. Therefore, of the seven, whose wife will she be? For they all had her. Okay, so in order to understand um, what the Sadducees was saying, the Sadducees had to be hearing a different understanding of the resurrection than the Messiah had. So let me show you the resurrection understanding that had been taken over. I think it's going to be found in Second Maccabees. So let me see if I can find it real fast in Second Maccabees. The resurrection understanding that had been given, that had been passed down, at least during the Greek era, the Greek rulership. So Second Maccabees resurrection. Second Maccabees 7, and we're going to start at verse number. Let's start at verse number 13. So this is them boiling the children of the woman because they refused to go against the law of Moses. So I think he boiled some. The Greek ruler, whoever this was, he killed some. He boiled some. I'm not sure. You can look at Second Maccabees and 7 and read it, but I'm just here to show you their understanding of the resurrection. I want to start at verse number 10. After him was the third, made a mocking stock. And when he was required, he put out his tongue, and that right soon, holding fast his hands manfully, he said courageously, these I have had from heaven, and for his laws I despise them. And from him I hope to receive them again. So he hoped to receive his tongue and etc. again. And so much that the king and they that were with him marveled at the young man's courage, for that he nothing regarded the pains. Now when this man was dead also, they tormented and mangled the fourth in like manner. So when he was ready to die, he said thus, it is good, being put to death by men, to look for hope from God, to be raised up again by him. As for thee, thou shalt have no resurrection to life. Afterwards, they brought the fifth also and mangled him. So you clearly see here that their understanding of the resurrection, dealing with the Greek period, was that they was going to die then, but at the end, the Lord God was going to raise them up again for being righteous. But for the unrighteous, there was going to be no resurrection to life. So we got here during the Greek time period, the understanding of the resurrection was dead people, physically dead people, coming back to life. Okay? So by the time of the Grecian time period, this is what's floating around from the doctrine of the Pharisees. We know that this isn't the Sadducees because the Sadducees did not believe in a coming back to life, a resurrection to the life. So we know that's not the Sadducees doctrine. So this is the Pharisee doctrine right here, that a person was going to die and then they was going to be brought back to life at the end by God. Okay, so they're looking at some type of physical death bringing back to physical life. All right, that's the understanding that Israel had during the Grecian time period. Now we can see this same understanding in John, This same understanding had been going on from the Grecians to the time of the Romans, probably because they was misunderstanding what Daniel and etc. was talking about. So they was seemed like they was pretty much winging it. But you go to John 11, verse number 21. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, physical death. But even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. So we can clearly see that there was an understanding that physical death, someone who died physically, was going to be raised physically. We can see clearly that this is the understanding that the Jews had. But then Christ messed her up when he said, I am the resurrection and the life. So that messed her up right there. But we're not going to discuss what Christ said in John as a rebuttal to that wrong doctrine. We're going to go back to Matthew 22. So we know that it was a doctrine by the Pharisees because the Sadducees didn't believe in it. So it only could be the Essenes or the Pharisees. And the New Testament doesn't talk about the Essenes. So it has to be the Pharisees. So the Sadducees had heard this doctrine from the Pharisees. And I guess they had been able to stump the Pharisees with this question. So they came with Christ. They didn't even believe in a resurrection, but they are looking at the understanding that the Pharisees had at the time, and they knew that would be a contradiction to the law of Moses. Because, let me explain why. Because if the woman died physically and the seven brothers died physically, and they was going to be raised physically, when the woman was raised, this is what they asked. In the resurrection thereof, of the seven, whose wife will she be? For they all had her. So, in other words, she will be married to seven men, which is unlawful. She would be breaking the law of Moses. The Lord would resurrect her into an unrighteous action. So the Sadducees, they believed that they had the doctrine of the resurrection stumped, which they did have the doctrine of the physical resurrection stumped. They were smart. They had that doctrine trapped. If this was about physical dead people coming back to physical life, just like they were before they died, in this scenario, this woman would be in polyandry. She would have a polyamory, whichever those poly. She would have seven husbands, which would have been unlawful. The Lord would have resurrected her into an unrighteous action. So that if it was about physical resurrection, they definitely would have had that doctrine stumped. But Jesus answered them, you are wrong because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. So the Messiah's response was, see, remember the Sadducees they wasn't dealing with the prophets. They wasn't dealing with the Tanakh. They was only dealing with the Torah. They was only dealing with the first five books of Moses. So when he told them, you do not know the scriptures. He's telling them that they don't know Torah. That's what he's explaining to them. He's explaining to them that they do not understand Torah, nor do they understand the power of God. So then, verse number 30, he goes into correcting their understanding of Torah. He says, "For in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven." So, in the action of the resurrection, he said, "For in the resurrection," so in the action of the resurrection, they are not marrying or being given in marriage. See, up here, they had in the action of the resurrection, the woman would have to be married to somebody. He's saying, no, in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage. So you have to understand, first of all, they are using the levirate marriage to contradict the understanding that the Pharisees had. So Christ is going to use that same understanding of the levirate marriage. And the levirate marriage, they had to be given into marriage in order to obtain an inheritance, in order for the brother's name to continue, in order for his inheritance to continue, they had to go through physical marriage. Christ is explaining to them, in order for this inheritance to occur, they are going to be like the angels in heaven. Now, the angels in heaven had an inheritance because the Lord gave it to them. It wasn't the will of man. See, this is what John, and we're going to go right back to Matthew 22. This is exactly what John 1 was hinting on. John 1, verse number 12 says, "But to all who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." Who are the children of God? Who are the sons of God? Angels. Think I'm not telling the truth? If you go right back to Torah, Genesis 6, the sons of God saw the daughters of man. These sons of God are spoken of as angelic, but sons of God really mean messengers of God. So if they are messengers of God, they would be angelic in nature because they are giving the message from the Lord himself. But we don't have to go into that right now. The point is, John is explaining that the people who believed on the Messiah, let me go right back there. Come on, mouse. Don't. Here we go. The people who believed on the Messiah, it says they were born not of blood, nor the will of flesh, nor the will of man. So what John did, he took away all carnality. He took away all things dealing with man. He took it all away. He took the blood away. He took their will away. He took it all away. He said, these children of God are born from God. They are not born from man. Even though they were man, they were really born from God. So, this is the power of God to make regular people his children. The power of God is to make regular people angels. And when they become children of God, they have an inheritance. So go back to Matthew 22. That's what he's talking about when he said they didn't know the power of God. The power of God. He's taking these people and he's giving them an inheritance through his will. That's what he's doing. He's giving them an inheritance through his will. So that the resurrection has nothing to do with marriage or be given into marriage. In order to receive that inheritance, it's being born from God. Okay, so that's the first thing. So in that resurrection, he's telling them, you guys don't even understand Torah. Verse 31. And as for the resurrection of the dead, see, first of all, he spoke about the resurrection itself. So now he said, hey, as for the action of the resurrection, they're not going to be marrying or given in marriage. But now let me explain to you about the people of the resurrection. See, first he explained the action of the resurrection. Now he's going to explain the people in the resurrection. See, this is what a lot of people they don't understand that Christ hit them with two different points. The first point was the resurrection itself. The second point was the people in the resurrection. That's why it says in verse 30, for in the resurrection, but verse 31, but as for the resurrection of the dead, you see, he's given a different element. First, he gave the action. Now he's going to talk about the elements. He's going to talk about the people in the resurrection. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. So Christ just used Torah because that came out of Torah. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That comes from the first 5 books of Moses. So what Christ did was he showed them that the understanding of the resurrection was actually in Torah. So when he told them, you are wrong because you know neither the scriptures, it's because they did not know that the understanding of the resurrection of the dead was actually found in Torah. And they didn't know the power of God because to them, in order to receive an inheritance, you had to go through the means of man. But no, the Christ said, you don't understand the power of God. He is the one that transforms and determines who has an inheritance in heaven. So if he's a God of a person, that person cannot be considered dead because God is not the God of the dead. He's not the God of the deceased. He's not the God of darkness. He's not the God of ignorance. He's not the God of sin. He's not the God of separation. He's not the God of the dead. He's only the God of the living. So if he is your God, that means you have been resurrected from physical death into spiritual life. He has taken away all things dealing with the flesh, and he has increased all things dealing with the spirit. So you can be fleshly dead and still walk around on the planet because your body is full of sin. The body has sin, but the spirit has life. That's exactly what Paul was teaching. I'm my flesh, death, but in my spirit, life, and etc. You can be considered a dead one with your separation from God in flesh, or you can be physically dead. No matter what, it's all about that physical death are rising spiritually in the Lord. When he becomes your God, you become an angel. You become spiritually alive. You're no longer in your flesh, which is considered death. So we have the understanding right there. He is the God of the living, not the dead. So Christ explained from Torah that the true resurrection is when God becomes your God. He becomes your rock. He becomes your guidance. He becomes your leader. He becomes your father. That's when you are truly resurrected from the dead. Okay. Sorry for that long, drawn out explanation, but first we had to understand what was going on. So, the sister asked me, let me go to her question, and I actually sent this to her for her to know. She says that was a good explanation, but what do we do with Matthew 27:52 through 53? All right. This is Matthew 27:52 through 53. It says this. The tombs also were open, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised, and coming out the tombs after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. Okay, first of all, we have to realize that Matthew was the only person who recorded this account. Matthew is the only person. Notice that Paul didn't speak about it. Luke didn't speak about it. Peter, none of them spoke about it later on. Matthew was the only person who recorded this. Now, what else do we have to realize? If you go to Matthew chapter 1, I'm just giving you the backstory to understand how to read the book of Matthew to understand what's going on in Matthew. If you go to Matthew chapter 1, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. If you see here, the son of David, David had a prophecy about his kingdom, and a ruler was going to come out of his seed that was going to have an everlasting kingdom. The son of Abraham. Abraham had a prophecy. And in Abraham's prophecy, his seed was going to bless all nations. All nations was going to be blessed through his seed. So the son David had a prophecy about his seed. Abraham had a prophecy about his seed, and we find out the same seed that was prophesied in David, the same seed was prophesied in Abraham, was actually Jesus Christ. So Matthew is going through and showing time and time again how Jesus Christ the Messiah fulfilled all of the messianic prophecies. That's why once you go to Matthew 5, he says these exact words. Matthew 5:17. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. So Matthew, and if you go out through all of Matthew's, he's talking about all the things that the Messiah fulfilled dealing with the messianic prophecies and other prophecies. So Matthew, as an author, is going above and beyond, proving to people that Jesus is in fact the prophesied Messiah. So once you get to Matthew 27, once again, what does Matthew do? He he goes above and beyond trying to prove that Jesus is in fact the Messiah. So look how powerful Jesus is. I'm gonna start at verse number 50. And Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up his spirit. And behold, the curtain of the temple was torn in two. When Jesus died, the curtain of the temple, listen to the how Matthew is describing the power of Jesus. And when Jesus died, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, and the earth shook, and the rocks were split. The tombs were open. Many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised, and coming out of the tombs after his resurrection. After Christ resurrected, he brought some saints with him, and they went into the holy city and appeared to many. So you can clearly see that Matthew, as an author, is writing in a style that shows that the Messiah is in fact the prophesied one, that Jesus is in fact the Messiah. He's the one prophesied. He's the one that has the power. He has the ability to do things. All things point to Jesus Christ. Matthew is writing in a way for his audience to understand that. So, Matthew 27:52 isn't speaking about the resurrection from the dead that Matthew 22 is talking about. Matthew 27 is about bodies coming out of a tomb as a witness to the power and majesty of the Messiah's work, the Messiah's death, burial, resurrection. So powerful that when he resurrected, even dead saints came with him to be seen as a testimony of the glory and power and majesty of the Messiah. Now, I know those words are not found there, but if you read how Matthew is explaining it, you can clearly see the imagery of what's going on. He's showing the majesty of the Messiah. So this is not talking about that resurrection in Matthew 22. It's not talking about that resurrection. It's talking about a different resurrection in which dead bodies came up as a testimony to the power of the Messiah. Now, the same second Timothy that you brought up actually proves this. Now, let me show you how the Second Timothy that you brought up proves this. If we go to Second Timothy 2:18, this is what it states. In fact, I want to start at verse 16 and go to 18. But avoid irreverent babble, for it will lead people into more and more ungodliness, and their talk will spread like gangrene. Among them are Hymenaeus and Philetus, who have swerved from the truth, saying that the resurrection has already happened. They are upsetting the faith of some. Now, Hymenaeus and if this resurrection is the resurrection of dead people coming out of the ground as alive people, then Hymenaeus and Philetus would be correct, because according to Matthew 27, dead people came out of the tomb at Christ's resurrection and was seen by many. So if dead people coming out of the tomb to life is the understanding of the resurrection, Hymenaeus and Philetus is absolutely correct, because according to Matthew, when Christ raised up, when he was resurrected, so was some dead saints with him. If that was the resurrection understanding. But it wasn't the resurrection understanding, because this is what the Messiah said had to occur, dealing with that resurrection, the resurrection that he was bringing. If you go to Matthew 24, starting at verse 3, tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? And the Messiah gives all kind of signs. Make sure no one will leave you astray. There will be nations against nations, kingdoms against kingdoms. False prophets will arise. False Christ will arise. Lawlessness will abound. The love of many will grow cold. The gospel will be preached throughout all the world. The abomination of desolation will be seen. There will be some fleeing into the mountains from it. There was going to be a time of tribulation, such as not has been before. And after that tribulation, then the Son of Man will appear, and etc. And then there will be a gathering. So the Messiah gave all of these signs that was going to lead up to the resurrection. And Hymenaeus and Philetus is saying that the resurrection had already occurred without those signs having to occur. See, that was the problem. They were saying that the resurrection already occurred without all of those signs occurring, which means Christ is not the prophesied Messiah. He was indeed a false prophet. So this is why in Second Thessalonians, and we're going to come right back to Second Timothy, Second Thessalonians chapter 2, Paul told them this, verse 1. Now concerning the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our being gathered together to him, that's the resurrection. We ask you, brothers, not to be quickly shaken in mind or alarmed, either by spirit or by a spoken word or a letter seeming to be from us, to the effect that the day of the Lord has come. Let no one deceive you in any way. So Paul told them around 51 AD that there was going to be people who was forging letters and lying, acting like that they were disciples, and they will be telling people that the day of the Lord has come. Paul told them this in verse 3, for that day will not come unless the rebellion comes first. Paul is saying, no, there's things that had to happen first before the day of the Lord comes. And the reason why Paul knows that is because he said he learned these things from the revelation of Jesus Christ, according to Galatians 1, 11, and 12. So Paul is saying, hey, the things that the Messiah said had to come to place, all of that has to come first before the day of the Lord comes. And Hymenaeus and Philetus in Second Timothy is saying, hey, none of that stuff has to occur. The resurrection had already come. So that means Christ is not, he wasn't the Messiah. That means that they know more than the Messiah. They are the true anointed ones. They know when the resurrection occurred. The Messiah didn't. That means that the disciples are false disciples. That means the church who follows the disciples, who follows the Messiah, are being deceived and led astray. So this is why they were turning the faith of many. Because if what Hymenaeus and Philetus were saying was true, the Messiah and all of his followers were in error. They was deceivers. they were fake. Now, you can clearly tell that Hymenaeus and Philetus and everyone who fell for their garbage did not believe the resurrection was dead bodies coming out of the ground, becoming alive, and walking around. See, you can't trick people like that. If no one has seen any dead saints walking around, then you can't deceive them and say, hey, 5,000, 2,000,000, 200,000, 5,000,000, or how many ever dead saints it was, had came up out of their graves in fleshly body and was walking around, and nobody seen them except Hymenaeus and Philetus and the people of the church who had some dead ones who's some of their dead relatives have died and they ain't seen now one of them. They just believed Hymenaeus and Philetus just because they said it. No, no. I highly doubt that. So their understanding of the resurrection couldn't have been dead people coming out of the ground, putting on flesh, walking around again. Hymenaeus and Philetus could not have tricked them like that. And Paul did not correct the nature of the resurrection, as my mentor, Dr. William Bell, taught me. He did not correct them. He corrected the timing of the resurrection. No, these things have to happen first before the resurrection occurs. He didn't correct the nature. He didn't say, hey, who saw dead people walking around? So you know Hymenaeus and Philetus is lying because none of your dead relatives have been walking around. Paul did not correct them like that. Paul corrected the timing. They had said the resurrection has already happened. No, there was still more signs that had to occur. One of the biggest signs was the temple had to be destroyed and etc. So these things had not occurred yet. Therefore, anybody who believed Hymenaeus and Philetus, they was taken over into that antichrist doctrine that Hymenaeus and Philetus was spewing out, that antichrist doctrine. But anyway, so that's my answer to both of your questions. The resurrection is them going from the old covenant to the new covenant. Now, I'm going to prove to you real fast the transitioning between covenants was the resurrection, and then I'll be done. The true biblical resurrection was the transitioning into from one covenant to the other covenant. This is what Paul stated. 2 Corinthians 3. 2 Corinthians 3, starting at verse number, let's start at verse number 5. It says, now that we are sufficient in ourselves to claim anything as coming from us, but our sufficiency is from God, who has made us sufficient to be ministers of a new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. The letter kills, the Spirit gives life. Now, he's finna explain it even more. Now, if the ministry of death carved in letters on stone came with such glory that the Israelites could not gaze at Moses' face because of its glory, which was being brought to an end. So Paul is taking them right back to Torah because the true understanding of the resurrection originated in Torah as the Messiah taught. It didn't originate in the prophets. You can see Isaiah talking about a resurrection, Daniel talking about a resurrection. The idea, the understanding of the resurrection didn't originate in the prophets, it originated in Torah. So now Paul is explaining that the ministry of death was carved in letters on stone. That's the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments was the old covenant. When Moses received the Ten Commandments, he had the second time, after he broke it the first time, the second time, he had to put that veil on his face because his face was shining after he received the old covenant, after he received the Ten Commandments. So Paul is going right back to that story that the Israelites could not gaze at Moses' face because of its glory. So Paul called them, even though it was glorious, even though it was a light, even though it shows enlightenment from Moses, and it showed a light to Israel, and that light freaked Israel out. So Moses had to pretty much veil that light from the covenant. Paul explained or called that covenant the covenant or the ministry of death. So we have the old covenant as the ministry of death. Now let's keep going on. We're not the ministry of the Spirit, have even more glory. For if there was glory in the ministry of condemnation, the ministry of righteousness must far exceed it in glory. Indeed, in all case, which once had glory had come to have no glory at all because of the glory that surpasses it. Let's keep reading. For if what was being brought to an end came with glory, which was the old covenant, much more will what is permanent have glory. The permanent one is the new covenant. Since we have such a hope, we are very bold, not like Moses, who would put a veil over his face that the Israelites might not gaze at the outcome of what was being brought to an end, but their minds were hardened. For to this day, when they read the old covenant, that same veil remains unlifted, but only through Christ is it taken away. Yes, to this day, when Moses is read, a veil lies over their hearts. But when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. Now, the Lord is the Spirit, and where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. And we all, with unveiled face, beholding the glory of the Lord, are being transformed. So they're going through a transformation into the same image from one degree of glory, that was the old covenant, to another, the new covenant. For this comes from the Lord who is the Spirit. And the Lord, what does the Lord teach about the Spirit? The ministration of the Spirit, as Paul called it. But what did the Lord teach about the Spirit? This is what the Lord taught about the Spirit. Sorry about that. You go to John 6:63. Let me see. All right, there we go. John 6:63. This is what the Lord taught about the Spirit. It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh is no help at all. The words that I have spoken to you are spirit and life. So the Spirit gives life. The ministration of the Spirit, the ministration of life, resurrection from death to life, the ministry of death, the ministry of the Spirit, the old covenant, the new covenant. So when a person enter into the new covenant, what is said when they enter into the new covenant. Jeremiah 31, verse number 32, 33. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them. I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. Hold on. Is that not what the Messiah stated about the resurrection from the dead? He is the God of the living and not the God of the dead. I will be their God, which meant that he wasn't their God yet. So if he's not their God, they are dead. But I will be their God. When he becomes their God, they are considered living. The resurrection from the dead, from the old covenant to the new covenant. The old covenant only with Israel, and it dealt with curses, blessings, and etc. The new covenant with Israel and all people who follows the Messiah, and there is no curses, no death inside of the new covenant, and it's permanent. It's permanent when the Lord dwells inside of his people, inside of the temple of God. So Christ is explaining the true resurrection was a covenantal relationship with the Father. Paul is explaining the true resurrection is when a person was able to leave the old covenant or no covenant at all and come into the new covenant and have a covenant with God. That's the true biblical resurrection. All right. Thank you all for listening in. No matter, hey guys, I have showed the proof. I have showed the proof. If you go to Revelation 21 explains when New Jerusalem comes down, God is with the mankind. He's their God, and they are his people. A new covenant promise, and now he's wiping away the tears from their eyes. There's no more death, there's no more mourning, there's no more crying, no more pain, no more sorrow, for all the former things have passed away because they are in a new covenant. They have been born again. They are in a new creation. They have a new life. They're not in the old ways of the old covenant and Jerusalem, old Jerusalem. This is why they are seeing a new Jerusalem in Revelation 21. And nobody asks, hey, if there's a new Jerusalem in Revelation 21, where is old Jerusalem? Old Jerusalem got destroyed in Revelation 20. That mystery Babylon that people want to be Russia or Rome or America, that mystery Babylon was the city of Jerusalem, old covenant Jerusalem, who killed the prophets, who martyred the church, who killed the Messiah. That old covenant Jerusalem, who they said, we have a law that says he must be killed. That same old covenant when Christ said, in order to enter into the kingdom of heaven, your righteousness has to surpass the righteousness of the Pharisees, and the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees was the law of Moses. Old covenant Jerusalem had to be taken out the way in order for people to enter into new Jerusalem, new covenant Jerusalem, where they had life and no more death. It's all about the covenantal relationship. And if a person doesn't understand this is what the Bible is teaching, they will literally tell you to wait forever in order for Revelation 21 to take place. They will literally tell you, they will tell their children will tell their children will tell their children, and everybody will continue telling each other like the church has been doing since Christ died. It's or sorry, since Jerusalem was destroyed about 1800 years ago, 1900 years ago, they're going to keep that same talking point. It's going to happen anytime now. Christ is going to come down. He's going to make everything great. All the dead people are going to resurrect. We're going to get new bodies. We're going to be walking around. Anybody that teaches that has not studied the Gospels. They have not studied the words of Christ. They have not listened to the Spirit. They are carnal people, and the Lord haven't showed them the truth yet. And I'm not being arrogant. I'm not saying I got all the answers, but what the Lord has showed me, I can definitely tell and show others. That's the truth. Thank you all for listening in. This is Elvin Israel from the Assembly of Sound Doctrine channel, as well as RPK, Resurrection, Prophecy, and Kingdom. Hopefully this answered your question in detail. I left the scriptures on the screen. I explained it. So there's nothing else that I can do. Stay in shalom until next time. Anybody have any more questions? I don't have a problem doing a video explaining the answers. I'm not going to write a whole book on text message when I can explain the answers. All right, y'all. Stay in shalom, and might be back later on tonight. I'm finna lay down. This took actually an hour. But I'm finna lay down and enjoy myself. All right, stay in shalom.